This is America's most haunted tattoo shop, the Convent Tattoo Studio in Deptford, New Jersey. This place is so haunted that clients have even walked out mid-tattoo because they were being touched and grabbed by the spirits. But why is this place so haunted? Well, they have thousands of haunted artifacts scattered throughout the tattoo shop that are sent from all over the world. They have 7 full-size human skeletons, yes, they're real, and they have a massive collection of true crime artifacts, including artwork from none other than John Wayne Gacy himself. The basement is an area that no one likes to go to inside of the shop. And when we stayed there for the night, we experienced some of the most terrifying activity we've seen in a long time. Something talked to us and moved an object directly in front of us on camera. The full video will be on my YouTube tomorrow, and I'll post more on here as well.
Watch these to find out they might get life in prison.
What they call felony murder, while in the perpetration or attempted perpetration of child abuse in the first degree, they're alleging that you murdered one Mary Welch. That is a charge called homicide felony murder. It is life without parole. It requires a DNA sample to be taken upon arrest, which is often like a cotton swab or in the inside of your cheek. The second offense that you're both charged with is called child abuse in the first degree, where they're alleging you knowingly or intentionally caused serious physical harm to a child. They're talking about this Mary Welch. It is a felony, possible penalty of up to life imprisonment or any term of years less than life. Now those are the 2 separate felony charges.
Imagine going on a school trip to a theme park and being killed after falling off a ride. On May the 9th, 2017, an 11-year-old schoolgirl was enjoying a trip to a theme park with other students. Eva Janath was on the Splash Canyon water ride at Drayton Manor Theme Park in Staffordshire. Splash Canyon is described as white water rapids. Guests travelled through the canyon on the circular rafts with waves crashing near to the boats. Part of the fun of the ride was being splashed with the water jets, and it featured fast-flowing sections and a long tunnel. Tragically for the schoolgirl, she ended up dying after she fell from the raft that she was on into the water beneath. She had tried to wade out of the water, but horrifically she was dragged under by the rapid water and suffered severe chest injuries. She was finally pulled out but was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at Birmingham Children's Hospital. She had been the first person to die at the theme park since 2004. The park was fined £1 million.
Let's talk about the shocking discovery that actually led to the release of Adnan Syed yesterday. As a recap, Adnan was convicted of killing his girlfriend, Heyman Lee, in 1999, but the evidence was not very convincing. And now it's come out that one of the detectives on the case, Bill Ritz, was actively hiding information on 2 other suspects in the case. One of these suspects actually told someone that they were very upset with Heyman Lee around the time of the murder and that they were going to, quote, make her disappear. And detectives knew full well about this, but it never made it to trial. Now it's also come out that one, if not both of these suspects have relevant criminal history, one was accused of SA and one is in jail for SA. And the evidence that the whole trial against Adnan hinged on was the fact that a person Adnan wasn't even really friends with came forward and said that Adnan did it, and cell phone records, which in 1999 were not really reliable. And let's not forget that the prosecutors really relied on the fact that Adnan was Muslim to accuse him and put him in jail, basically saying that the fact that he was dating in high school brought so much shame on his family that after she broke up with him, he had no choice but to murder her. 30 days to decide if they want to retry the case, but for now, Adnan is a free man. Does anyone remember when they were building a freeway outside of St. Louis and they found over 200 bodies in one spot? And before I even get into it, you know that's what tonight's episode is going to be about. So outside of St. Louis, there's this one area that has all of these strange mounds. There's no hills anywhere else, so people always wondered if they were man-made. But in the 1960s, when they were building a freeway there, they had to cut through these mounds for construction. So they thought they would just cut into them and there would be dirt inside. But that was not the case. One of the mounds had 272 bodies buried inside of it. And they were like, what is going on? Is this from a serial killer? Well, 2 things. First, the bodies were in really bad shape. The skeletons were largely women, and they were all lined up in these rows. And the ones that weren't women, a couple of them had been beheaded. And the second thing is that these bodies were 1,000 years old. It turns out that these mounds were from an ancient civilization that practiced human sacrifice. And this was kind of a big discovery because historians didn't think that indigenous Americans practiced ritual sacrifice until that discovery. But why were they sacrificing people and how were they doing it? Well, if you want to know more about what was happening in the area and you maybe want to know more about human sacrifice in general, you're definitely going to want to check out tonight's episode.
This is the genius way that US Marshals tricked over 100 criminals into giving themselves up to police. It was a cold morning on December the 15th, 1985. Excited guests piled into Washington Convention Center, eager to collect their prizes. In the weeks prior, a genius plan was in motion. The US Marshals Service had come up with a sting to hopefully lure in criminals to one central location. The officers working on this ruse knew that they needed to do something big and exciting. They needed a way to trick criminals into their trap. They decided that NFL tickets were the ideal bait. They decided to send wanted criminals letters supposedly from a new sports TV channel called Flagship International Sports TV. They were told that their names had been randomly selected from Washington locals in order to get free tickets and transport to a football game. The invite also told them that they could collect their prizes at a pre-game party. There would be even more chances to win amazing prizes. One such prize was an amazing all-expenses-paid trip to a Super Bowl XX in New Orleans. However, when they showed up, all was not what it seemed. They eventually realized that the event was an elaborate ruse in order to capture over 100 criminals. Between them, they had warrants outstanding for 90 felonies and 70 misdemeanors. They were all placed under arrest, and the trick has gone down in history as one of the most successful and creative stings yet.
This TikToker was arrested for extremely disturbing behavior, and the police were able to identify her through her TikTok videos. Meet Christina Ray Hernandez, one of the most vile women from Florida. Just last year in 2022, Christina was arrested for the possession of CP or CSAM. So on Christina's TikTok account, she would constantly post about her life, what was going on, updating her followers, and she would also post a lot about her nails, videos of her getting her nails done, doing them herself. This was her biggest flex in life, and thankfully she did film a lot of her nails because these nails would lead the police right to her front door. So police initially were led to Christina through the messaging app Kik. And it was while she was on this app when Christina was collecting, trading, and downloading CP images with other child predators on the internet. So when police actually tracked the IP address of the account that was sharing these CP images, they found Christina. And attached to the account, they found a bunch of images of Christina, some of them explicit, and images that showed off her nails. So after doing some digging, the investigators came across her TikTok page, found videos of her showing off her nails, and they were able to match the exact nails that she had on in the TikTok video to those that she had on her Kik profile. And that was the final straw. They swept in and arrested Christina. So the 13 videos that they found on Christina's Kik account were disturbing. And these videos depicted the abuse of children from the ages of 5 to 14 years old. And these videos were extremely graphic, and according to one detective, they gave him nightmares for months. So I don't know what ended up happening after her arrest. I couldn't find anything in the news about it. Hopefully there's going to be some jail and prison time here for Christina. But this once again goes to show that pedophiles aren't always men, and that sometimes they can be lurking on TikTok getting their nails done and doing horrific things in the shadows when nobody is supposedly watching.
Stabbed to death in front of horrified bystanders, Holly Gazzard was only 20 years old when she had her life brutally ended by her scorned ex-boyfriend. Holly had met Asher Maslin in 2013 while she was working in a bar, and her family had a bad feeling about him right from the start. Holly's personality began to change throughout the relationship, and it was clear to her family that she was being controlled by Asher. Towards the end of that year, she had confided in her family that she needed to end the relationship, and she wanted to do it as amicably as possible. She ended the relationship in January 2014, and Asher didn't take it well. In the weeks following the breakup, Asher stole money from Holly's bank account and sent her threatening messages, even going as far as threatening her life. Holly went to the police on February 16th and gave a statement, but little was done, and just 2 days later, Asher walked into the salon where Holly was working and attacked her with a knife in front of horrified staff and clients. He stabbed Holly in the neck, chest and torso while people tried to fight him off, and she died 2 hours later in hospital. Asher pleaded guilty to Holly's murder and received a life sentence with a minimum of 24 years. After Holly's death, her devastated family actually found out that Asher had been arrested previously 23 times for assault and GBH. He was a serial perpetrator. They set to work creating the Holly Gazzard Foundation, which launched the Holly Guard app. The app basically acts as a personal safety device. It can set off a high-pitched alarm to deter an attacker, and it also sends an alert to your emergency contacts with audio and video footage of what's happening at that time if you feel unsafe. Holly's family just want to make sure that every man and woman can feel safe, and the foundation supports charities that are fighting domestic abuse and knife crime.
This is Miss Pac-Man, one of the worst videos on the internet explained. The video that I'm about to explain is about 1 minute long, and it starts in a dark room. And the first thing you notice is the screaming in the background. The camera then pans to the floor, revealing a severed hand, and it then pans to the bed which Alejandro Eco Chubb is on. The bed was soaked in blood, and Alejandro had both of her hands cut off, and at this point you can see the full extent of her injuries. Alejandra had been hit in the face so hard with a machete that she had a horizontal wound going across her face that was so deep it actually reached her ears. The wound was halfway up her face, right in the middle of her nose, and it was horizontal, hence the name of the video, Miss Pac-Man, because the wound was so deep it looked like an exaggerated mouth. But the disturbing thing is, Alejandra is still alive, and at this point you discover the screaming in the background isn't her, but actually someone else in the house, and according to rumors and reports, it's actually her children. The camera then pans to her face, and it shows she is still aware and conscious. Her eyes moving across the room in complete pain and fear. You hear her struggling to breathe due to the insane amount of blood, and you hear constant gurgling as she tries to hang on to her life. You also hear her try to breathe, but due to the injury, it's extremely muffled. It almost sounds like a young baby crying. You also hear a male's voice behind the camera. Now, the question is this the neighbors who discovered her? And if it is, why in the world are they recording her? Or was it her partner who was responsible for this brutal murder? The camera stays on Alejandra's face for about 30 to 40 seconds, and you see her withering in pain. You hear her trying to scream, and at one point the camera goes closer to her wound, and at this point you see just how deep the wound really is. It's literally 3/4 of the way through her head. This is a very hard watch. You don't see the awful act committed on camera, but seeing the aftermath is traumatizing. Alejandra was pronounced dead after this video was taken. This video is considered one of the worst, and its brutality is compared to Funky Town, 3 Guys 1 Hammer, and much more. Nobody knows how this video ended up on the internet, and it remains a mystery. Whatever you do, don't go searching for the video or picture. It's way different than a regular cartel video, and it's more of a real-life horror video. A complete living nightmare for those in the room. Trust me, it will mess you up completely. Rest in peace to Alejandro Eco Chubb. This is absolutely sickening, and I can't believe people who do stuff like this exist. This is the Timothy Pitson case, the boy who has been missing for more than 12 years. On May 11th, 2011, 6-year-old Timothy Pitson was dropped off at school in Illinois by his father, James Pitson. He was picked up shortly after by his mother, Amy Fry Pitson, who took him on a 3-day trip to various amusement parks and water parks. But Amy Pitson's body was found in a motel room in the city of Rockford, Illinois, having died by suicide, with a note stating that Timothy was safe, but he would never be found. Between 12 p.m. and 1:30 p.m. on May 13th, 2011, Amy Pitson telephoned several family members, including her mother and brother-in-law, telling them that she and Timothy were safe and not in any danger. Amy Pitson failed to contact her husband, however, who had been attempting to locate the pair, after being notified by his son's school that he was not present when he arrived to pick him up at the end of the school day. Timothy was heard in the background during the calls saying that he was hungry. At 7:25 p.m. on May 13th, 2011, Amy Pitson was seen alone on security camera at a Family Dollar store in Illinois where she purchased a pen, notepaper, and envelopes. At 8 o'clock p.m., she was sighted at Sullivan's Food Store in Winnepago, again unoccupied. At 11:15 p.m., she checked into the Rockford Inn in Rockford, Illinois, where sometime that night or the next morning she took her own life by slashing her wrists and neck and overdosing on antihistamines. At 12:30 p.m. on May 14th, 2011, her body was found by a hotel maid along with a note In the note, Amy Pitson apologized for the mess she had created and explained that Timothy would never be found, but was completely safe with the people who would care for him. Police found the knife that Amy Pitson had used to kill herself, and it contained her blood. Also, a concerning amount of blood was found in her car, which belonged to Timothy. However, a family member later revealed that the stains were likely caused by a nosebleed Timothy had suffered in the car earlier that month. It was also noted that Amy Pitson's cell phone was missing. An examination of her vehicle revealed that it had been parked in a grassy area, possibly near a stream but close to a highway. To this day, no new information has came out about Timothy Pitson or where he is. James Pitson, Timothy's father, stated that he believes his son is still alive somewhere. So, what do you think happened to Timothy Pitson? Did his mom sell him to someone for money and with the guilt she took her own life? Or was his mom extremely depressed and she just gave him away to family members? Or was Timothy Pitson murdered? These questions cannot be answered to this day, and this case still remains a complete mystery.
This 911 call is absolutely horrifying. It's the moment Deborah Jeter called the emergency services to let them know that she just slit her daughter's throats.
911, what's your emergency?
I just killed my children.
Excuse me?
I just killed my children.
Where are you?
I'm in the abandoned house on Highway 77. I was out here to save the one that didn't, God.
What's your name?
Bitch, called them. Have you already called them?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
Okay.
Are you in your car?
No, I'm not in my car. I'm in the house walking around. And, one of them's still alive for real. She's asking to be saved, and I couldn't handle that. And so now
She thinks she's in an abandoned house.
it's been a long time. She might already die because she's bled out a lot. And one of them is dead. She's dead. But the other one, she wants to be saved, and she needs to be saved. And I don't see any lights. Tell them to get the fuck out here.
Honey, they're coming. They're coming.
Right here. Goodbye.
All right, bye.
Deborah had actually been prevented from seeing her children after an incident in which she threatened her life in front of them. The two girls, aged 12 and 13, had been living with their father Lee while their mother received psychiatric care. Neighbours of the couple said that they often argued and the police had actually been called out several times. In May 2009, Lee had requested a divorce from Deborah, and he'd also taken out a temporary restraining order against her, which prevented her from seeing him or their two daughters. However, in June 2009, a judge lifted that restraining order and actually allowed an unsupervised visit between Deborah and her children. That visit would prove fatal. 12-year-old Kelsey wouldn't come out of that visit alive. The girls were apparently really excited to be seeing their mum, and she'd told them that she'd got a surprise for them. She picked them up and then drove them to an abandoned house in rural Texas, and once they were inside, she pulled out a knife. She went after 13-year-old Kirsten first, who told her little sister to run, and she then turned and went after Kelsey. Kirsten did everything she could to protect her little sister, and she was stabbed in the back while fighting Deborah off. Deborah then carried on attacking Kelsey, eventually slitting her throat. She then turned back to Kirsten and did the same to her. Miraculously, Kirsten survived, and she begged her mum to call an ambulance, saying she didn't want to die. It was too late for Kelsey. When emergency services arrived, she was pronounced dead, and Kirsten was rushed to hospital and Deborah was arrested. In 2010, Deborah Jeter pleaded guilty to murder and attempted murder, saying that she did it to get back at Lee because he'd filed for divorce and wanted custody of their children. She received life without parole.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
This is the Kelly Ann Bates case, a true crime case you would never forget. Kelly Ann Bates was an English teenager who was murdered in Manchester, England at the age of 17 by her abuser James Patterson Smith. She was tortured by him over a period of 4 weeks, including having her eyes gouged from their sockets, up to 3 weeks before her death, before being drowned in a bathtub. In 1993, Smith began grooming Kelly Bates when she was 14 years old, having met her while she was babysitting for friends. Approximately 2 years later, when she had left school, Bates moved in with Smith at his home in Funeral Road, Gorton. She was concealing the age difference between them from her parents, Tommy and Margaret Bates. Kelly Bates' mother knew something was wrong with Smith the first time she met him, and she said, "As soon as I saw Smith, the hairs on the back of my neck went up. I tried everything I could to get Kelly away from him." Although Kelly Bates had left Smith briefly because of arguments with him, she was once more living with him at the end of November 1995. Her parents also noticed bruises on her, which she explained away as being results of accidents. Kelly Bates became increasingly withdrawn, and at the end of December 1995, she resigned from her part-time job. In March 1996, Kelly Bates' parents received cards in the mail, who they thought were from Kelly for their anniversary and birthday, but only Smith had written them. And when her brother tried to see her at Smith's house, Smith said she was not home. And when a concerned neighbor asked about her, she was briefly shown at an upstairs window. But on April 16, 1996, Smith reported to authorities that he had accidentally killed his girlfriend during an argument in the bathtub, claiming that she had inhaled water and died following his attempts of resurrecting her. He also claimed that she often pretended to be unconscious. Police went to Smith's address and found Kelly Bates' naked body in a bedroom. Her blood was found throughout the house, and a post-mortem examination revealed over 150 separate injuries on her body. During the last month of her life, she had been kept bound and sometimes tied to a radiator or furniture by her hair, and other times by her neck using some sort of object. William Lawler, the home office pathologist who examined her body, said, "In my career, I have examined almost 600 victims of homicide, but I never came across injuries so extensive." These are the following injuries found on Kelly Bates' body: scalding to her buttocks and left leg, burns on her thigh caused by the application of a hot iron, a fractured arm, multiple stab wounds caused by knives, forks, and scissors, stab wounds inside of her mouth, crush injuries to both hands, mutilation of her ears, nose, eyebrows, mouth, lips, and genitalia, wounds caused by a spade and pruning shears, both eyes gouged out, later stab wounds to the empty eye sockets, and partial scalping. The pathologist determined that her eyes had been removed no less than 5 days and no more than 3 weeks before her death. She had been starved, having almost lost 20 kilograms in weight and not received any water for several days before her death. The injuries were not the result of one sudden eruption of violence. They must have been caused over a long period and were extensive and so terrible that the defendant must have deliberately and systematically tortured Kelly Bates. The cause of death was drowning, but immediately prior to this, she was beaten over the head with a shower head. The jury took only 1 hour to find Smith guilty of Kelly Bates' murder, sentencing him to life in prison. This case is absolutely horrible, and rest in peace to Kelly Ann Bates.
Imagine being held captive in a basement, and when police arrive you think you're free. You call out for help, but they leave you there to be killed. In the 1980s, girls in Belgium started vanishing. The local community in Brussels was understandably unsettled. They had no idea a monster was living among them. Marc Dutroux was reportedly abused as a child. When he became an adult, he turned to a life of crime. He was involved in substance dealing and selling stolen cars. He married early and had 2 sons, but he had many affairs and started abusing his wife. They separated and he married his second wife, Michelle Martin. The pair would go on to do the unthinkable. In 1985, the couple had a disturbing hobby. They would kidnap and women. A friend of the couple called Jean also helped them. Marc had managed to convince him that he owed him a favour. On June 7th, 1985, they took their first victim. This was 11-year-old Sylvie D, who had been walking home. Men jumped out of the car and grabbed her and kidnapped her, and when they got her home, they AR'd her. They took a Polaroid picture of her before setting her free. They took many more victims before eventually being caught by police. The girls that were set free went to police and provided them with information to make the arrest. Marc, Michelle, and Jean were imprisoned for a short time. Marc, however, managed to manipulate the prison officials into thinking he was disabled, so he got many benefits. He was also able to state that he couldn't sleep and got prescribed some sleeping tablets, which he would go on to use for a sinister purpose. Marc was released in 1992 after serving just 3 years in prison. This time he learned a lesson: to set no more of his victims free. He built a dungeon in his basement for his next victims. Between 95 and 96, he would kidnap at least 6 children. He kept them in his basement, tortured them and SA'd them, and used the sleeping tablets to sedate them. It was at this point that news was circulating in the area of the missing children. 2 8-year-olds had vanished, and later that year 2 teenagers too. It was clear that this was no coincidence. Shockingly, despite Mark's own mother ringing police and reporting him, it would take 5 months for police to go to his house. Mark's mum even told them he was keeping girls captive. Mark was arrested during this period for stealing a car. He spent 4 months in prison while 2 of his victims remained in the basement. Michelle knew about these girls, and Mark had told her it was her job to feed them and water them while he was in prison. Frustratingly, although police finally searched his house at this point, despite hearing children's voices, the police just left. They said it sounded like the voices were coming from outside. They even found undeveloped camera film, which, had they just developed the film, they would have seen the basement in these images. Mark had documented the process of building the dungeon via the camera. Tragically, due to Michelle stating that she was too frightened to go down into the basement, the girls died of starvation. When Mark was released, more girls started vanishing. This included 12-year-old Sabine Dardine and 14-year-old Letitia Delhi. Mark was finally arrested after an eyewitness recognised his van involved in an abduction. He confessed and showed police his dungeon. He also led police to where he'd buried 2 of his child victims alive. It also transpired that he'd had an accomplice called Bernard Weinstein. After the pair had a disagreement, Mark also buried him alive. There was public outrage at the mishandling of the case. There were protests on the street, and there was even claims of a wider P-ring. The 2 brave survivors, Sabine and Letitia, testified in court against Mark. They recalled being chained to a bed and repeatedly AR'd. Michelle was given 30 years in prison, and Mark got life. This little girl was kidnapped in 2018 and has just been found. On the 25th of October 2018, 4-year-old Aranza Lopez was on a supervised visit with her biological mum. Her mum, Esmeralda, was being investigated over abuse allegations, so Aranza was actually in foster care at the time. It was arranged that the pair would have a supervised visit at a Washington shopping centre. However, during the visit, Esmeralda requested to take Aranza to the toilets and used the opportunity to snatch the little girl in a stolen vehicle. The FBI were notified and a huge search for Aranza, and even advertised a $10,000 reward. It wasn't until a year later that Esmeralda was found and arrested, but there was still no sign of the little girl. That was until last month. She was recovered by Mexican authorities in February in western Mexico. In 2021, Esmeralda was actually extradited back to Washington State and pled guilty to second-degree kidnapping and robbery. She was sentenced to 20 months in prison. If I didn't know this was a true crime case, I would think it was a disturbing horror film. On the morning of the 7th of October 2022, a barefoot woman was running around Excelsior Springs, Missouri, bashing on people's doors. Witnesses describe her looking like she came straight from a horror film, and she was calling for help. She'd been beaten, held captive, and SA'd for weeks. The woman was a shocking sight. She was covered in injuries and was wearing a bin bag. Disturbingly, she was gasping for breath as she had a very tight metal collar locked around her neck. It was a nurse who opened the door to her and let her come in. The nurse started to call police, and at this point the woman panicked. She warned her that the captor would kill her and claimed that he had killed her 2 friends. When police got there, the woman explained that a man called Timothy had captured her the month prior. He'd been holding her hostage this whole time. She said he'd been keeping her locked in the basement and had been SAing her. Disturbingly, she told police that he actually had a young son who lived at the house with him. When Timothy had taken his young son to school the one day, she used it as her opportunity to escape. Police made their way to the home of 39-year-old Timothy Haslett Jr. and found the property did in fact have a basement like the woman described. Timothy was arrested and is facing 9 charges including first-degree kidnapping. He's being held on a $3 million bond and faces 5 life sentences. Before his arrest, police were actually called to his address 3 times. Twice they were asked to do welfare checks, and this was from an employer and also family members. Police have searched his home with cadaver dogs and they haven't yet released what they know.